And I found like little techniques I could use in my playing, like a little slide and stretch technique, which is, for lack, I couldn't think of anything more original to call it. But like so I can get from here to here, one position is by just kind of taking, and that was probably maybe from an Alan Holdsworth line, like a taking like A minor, like wherever there's a half step, or even if sometimes if there's not, to the major 7 of the A minor. You can kind of get like around the fretboard that way too. So it kind of breaks the old, I'm learning this in pattern number 4. You kind of like all of a sudden pattern number 4 and 5 were all one pattern, and then hopefully on the good nights it's all one big pattern. Then you're not even thinking about it when you're going in between. But that's how I practice. I have a thing that I talk to my students sometimes too, because they always ask me about playing over chord changes, and I don't know what the secret to that is, except just knowing all your scales. To me, playing over chord changes or playing over real book songs is like typing. I remember when I was in high school, I used to, I took, just to get out of whatever classes I could get out of, I took like a few quarters of typing, and I got pretty good where I could see another piece of what I was supposed to be typing. I just be typing, not even looking at the keys. I just knew where all the letters were, right? So it's kind of like that with guitar. You just kind of know where all the notes are, and then you see all of a sudden you see a B altered chord. You just kind of G minor, B flat major 7, and it's all like kind of right there under my fingers. So everything just kind of shifts, but the hard thing about playing over chord changes is people seem to realize that they're supposed to be on another chord change, half a measure after the chord's already happened. So I have this thing that I kind of told my students that it's kind of like practicing time with no time, where you're working on a phrase and you just kind of stop on the end of 4. You remember where you are in the phrase and just kind of stop yourself and see the new scale under your fingers. Like it might be a 2/5, B minor, and I might. On the end of 4, I'm going to stop. I'm going to remember where I am in the phrase. Okay, I'm going to go altered. I want to get. Yeah. That's kind of cool. I just went up in half steps. So, that was just what I came up right now, right? But that's how I practice sometimes. I like practice, and even though there's no metronome going, I'll just kind of remember where I am in the phrase. But you got to remember where you are in the phrase. That's the whole secret. So that's how I practice like songs with chord changes in them. I'll just take it. And I also tell my students, because some of my students can kind of half-ass play over the chord changes, excuse my French, but they'll kind of skate over by playing blues changes, which is great. A couple times too, if you can get away with blues changes over chord changes. But what you really want to hear is if they're getting inside the chord harmony. So I have them oftentimes play solos with nobody playing chords. And that's always a real telltale sign of if they're really covering the chord changes at all. Because I could just sit here and go, and you couldn't really hear the chord changes. But if I went, you could really hear the chord changes there when I hit that E. So when I stop my students, when they play a couple courses through and they're feeling pretty good about playing over Dolphin Dance or whatever they're playing, then I say, okay, well, do it with nobody playing chords. That's a whole different thing. It's like, how do you get a guitar player to turn down, put music in front of them? So no, it's the same kind of thing, where they all of a sudden you realize, what they're really cheating on and what they're really not. So that's a good exercise too, I found from all my open counseling. When I do open counseling at school, it's a because the level is, it's a combination for different reasons. Because I was an idiot at one time in my life too, but there's a lot of students who come in my class who can't really play that well yet, and but I try to give everybody a benefit of the doubt. I give everybody like something to live for at the end of the day. So my open counseling is usually pretty full these days because I get guys who maybe just want to kind of get into jazz. They can't really play yet, and if they do want to play, I'm not going to sit there and belittle them or say, "Go home and practice." You played a wrong note. That I don't do that. I always try to give them something to because usually everybody's got something. I've seen some players who I thought would never amount to anything, who've just blossomed into great players. There's I just remember this one Japanese student. Some of the guys here know a guy named Joichiro, who was a student of mine from MI, like how many years ago now? Maybe 8 or 9 years ago. But he was, really shy. he was just a little petite guy who would sit in the corner of my open counseling room, and he would just barely play. You know, if he did play, it was just like so shy. I was going, oh God, you know. And he just kind of stuck. But I saw, I could tell there's a certain love and passion there for the instrument, you know. And he, man, you should hear this cat now. He just came out of it. And I was just thinking, you know, what if I'd stifled him, or like, you know, belittled him some, or tried to go that route, you know, of you know, sparing the rod with him. I mean, no telling what he'd probably be, you know, working at his dad's newspaper or whatever. But, you know, he just really came. So I find that everybody kind of has like something kind of hidden that's really good, you know. And sometimes I won't see it, you know. I always try to like give them, you know, I can always hear something good in everybody's playing anyway. I can always say, oh, you know, your time is not too good, but your choice of notes are pretty cool, you know. Working this, you know, and that's a good thing. This is a story I just remembered. There's a teacher named Carl Schroeder who's a great teacher at Musicians Institute. He's been there forever. And my first day in class at Musicians Institute, I got through playing, I think he had me playing All the Things You Are, some standard, and he gets through and the class is really quiet, and he goes, well, Alan, your sight reading's not very good, but your solo sucked. This is cool. And you know, he had such a sense of humor, though. I mean, I had to laugh. It wasn't really, because he was right. He was totally right. But, you know, you have to, I guess my point is that I've just found that with students, you have to kind of, it's a mentoring and nurturing process, because if they're musicians and they're really artists, you know, somebody can surprise you when you least expect it. I've heard so many people who I didn't think would ever do anything, who just, you know, sometimes in the course of 6 months, become this player who is like, oh, how cool is that? You know, look at a guy like Jeff Buckley. You guys know who Jeff Buckley was? He was at MI back when we were students together, and he was totally into jazz. I mean, he used to play like an Ovation, kind of weird Ovation electric guitar, like a Glenn Campbell guitar or whatever it was, some goofy ass guitar. And but he was really into Alan Holdsworth. And we used to sit there and play. We used to play over chords, and you would never think about it, where his life changed and where he went off to the song. If you ever know Jeff Buckley's music, there's no guitar solos anywhere. There's just really cool guitar parts and great songwriting, you know. So everybody kind of goes their own direction, you know. So I guess have faith. I don't know. I was making some big relevant point there. The older I get, the more I listen to the old music I listened to when I was a kid. The stuff that first got me interested in guitar, I kind of abandoned for years of training at Berkeley, and, you know, trying to play fusion stuff that was, I think the old fusion is still the best, you know, the stuff I grew up in a great time. I mean, I'm 54 years old now, so I remember like in the 70s and the 80s were the best time to be a guitar player, because everything on the radio was, you know, Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan and Joni Mitchell. There's always a killer guitar solo someplace, and As My Guitar Gently Weeps, or all these like great things, you know. And of course now, I don't know if the only, maybe country music, you know, you hear some guitars every now and then, but it's just not the same. So I grew up in a really good time for learning stuff. But the older I get, the more I go back and listen to that old stuff, and it's just like, you know, nothing's ever going to feel as good as B.B. King playing Thrill Is Gone, or nothing's ever going to, you know, feel as good as like an old Beatles song. I mean, the way John Lennon was just, his lyrics and George Harrison's guitar parts, it's great. Dwayne Allman's my hero. Even though he was out of tune half the time, and there were so many recordings of him playing, still something about, if you heard Dwayne Allman play on I don't know if you guys even know who he is, because there's a lot of recordings where if you ever heard Layla by Derek and the Dominoes, that's all Dwayne Allman at the end, that slide high stuff. But the Live at the Fillmore East album has some of the best slide guitar, and it's totally so emotional. I mean, like with that, you can do with a couple notes, you just kind of go, oh my God, it's just like, I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it, you know. So things like that, I've kind of gone first full circle, and for my style in particular, which I guess is why I'm here, but it's like I care less about, you know, acrobatics on guitar. I love somebody who, like, you know, I can hear thoughtful playing and hear somebody who's playing over chord changes, and I can hear musicality, but it doesn't do anything for me to hear like guys who have like phenomenal technique and say nothing with it, you know. That's just me, because I'm just getting older, so. I don't know what point I was making there, but it was. I practiced less about to learn a lick, but more to get to that zone. A lot of times I'll just, like, even if the TV's on, I'll be considering kind of. And eventually, you'll strike oil. I swear. There's something like, you know, you can keep. It might just be like you're going through the motions. It doesn't really mean anything. But then, like, something kind of kicks in, and I find sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes it's 5 seconds, sometimes it doesn't happen at all. But before I play, like usually before I go on, like at the baked potato or something, I'll just sit at home and kind of run through scales and ideas. And once again, it's motifs. If I have like one motif, I try to work it all over the fretboard. You know, if it's a you know, and try to hear the tone. I was just kind of working over the fretboard, just get familiar with the intervals and the patterns. That's what I do. But it's more not to learn a lick or not to get my speed up, because that's usually always kind of there. It's more to kind of try to tap into that that stream of consciousness that is where where all the kind of cool stuff happens. You know, that's why guys, you know, you don't need a lot of technique to do that. You know, I mean, the guys, you know, I think of all the guys who just know nothing about guitar theory-wise. You know, like Dwayne Allman probably didn't know a whole lot of theory, or Hendrix probably knew a little bit. But you know, the magic things that happened with their guitars when they were probably not thinking about it, and it certainly wasn't because they were thinking of a diminished scale up a half step from a root of an altered chord. You know, it was because they were just feeling it in the moment, and it was the right timing, and it was the right lick. And so, you know, I think it comes down to the passion you want, the passion that you have for a guitar and for the way what it can do. Guitar is so expressive. That's why I'm so glad they've never been able to really sample it, because there's just so many ways to attack it. You know, so I kind of wait for that to happen. That's what I do. You know, it helps to, once again, it's like when you do your own music, it makes it a lot easier too, because you know what the chord changes are, and you know what you're trying to emote, and what kind of feelings you're trying to express in this or that song. When I'd play with other people, even if it was as great as Gino Vanelli, you know, doing like Brother to Brother, these big epic guitar solos, it still wasn't my stuff. I still kind of had to work out solos. For a lot of the bigger bands that I played with, I would like work out a solo, because you know you might only have like 8 measures to shine. You know, you can't wait for that moment of consciousness to like hope it strikes right then. You know, so I'd usually like have certain 2 or 3 directions to kind of go with my solos that were always inspired every night. I actually saw a long time ago. I saw Steve Morse. You know, Steve Morris is from the Dixie Dregs, or Steve Morris. He used to play with a band called the Dixie Dregs, and they were from Georgia. And I used to live in Auburn, Alabama, which is right next to Georgia. We used to go see them all the time at this one little club. I remember seeing them one time about 4 nights in a row at this one club, because our band played there, so we got in for free. And after the second night, I said, "What is that?" I realized he was playing the same solo. He had worked out solos in certain songs. He had worked out these solos, and they were great solos, because they'd build. And like, the audience is like, "Wow!" But of course, most of the audience wasn't going back every night like me, you know. So, you know, sometimes you can't always rely on that, you know, especially for like the gigs where I get hired. And I'm only using Gino Vanelli because he's probably the most recent guy, where we'd play in front of like thousands of people, and I have like 8 measures to do something really exciting. And you know, if I'm having a bad day, I kind of want something to rely on that I know is going to work. Scott Henderson told me when he did the Chick Corea album that he, you know, worked out most of his solos before he went in, because he didn't want to go into the studio and hope that he was inspired. You know, but you know, you work out a solo that's still coming from you, and it's still coming from an inspired place. You're just kind of a little more tight, but it's a lot more rewarding when it's your own music, and you know, not playing Boogie Oogie Oogie at the Ramada Inn. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, it's much more satisfying when you're doing your own thing. Okay, so I think it's about time for the other band. We're going to set up, and I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know any of their songs, so I'm going to wait till the 1-1-1 progression comes around and then play. Whenever the A minor hits, then I'm going to jump in there and play a solo with these guys. Anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Alvas and Jeff Rivera, and hope I've given you something to go with there. Are we cool, Larry? Everything's cool?